From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. ISIS Khorasan has struck. 12 U.S. Marines and 60 Afghans were killed in multiple attacks at Kabul Airport. 15 Americans are injured, according to the Pentagon. At least 140 Afghans have been wounded. Taliban spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid says that Taliban guards are also among the casualties. He tweeted, "The Islamic Emirates strongly condemns the bombing targeting civilians at Kabul Airport." He also said the explosion took place in an area where U.S. forces are responsible for security. There were at least 2 explosions near an airport gate, one being a suicide bomber. The attacks were accompanied by gunfire. According to local Afghan media, the blasts occurred from inside a crowd of Afghans close to the Abbey Gate area. Abbey Gate is among the 3 airport gates the U.S. asked the Americans to stay away from for approximately 15 hours before the attack. Evacuations from the Kabul airport, however, continue. Here is General Kenneth McKenzie, Commander, U.S. Central Command.
Please know that we continue to execute our number 1 mission, which is to get as many American citizens and other evacuees as possible out of Afghanistan.
104,000 people have already been evacuated from Afghanistan through the Kabul airport. President Biden addressed the nation. He extended his condolences to the nation and declared his resolve to defeat terrorists.
These American service members who gave their lives, it's an overused word, but it's totally appropriate here, were heroes. Heroes who've been engaged in a dangerous, selfless mission to save the lives of others. They're a part of an airlift, an evacuation effort unlike any seen in history. To those who carried out this attack, as well as anyone who wishes America harm, know this: we will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay.
Republicans jumped on the opportunity to claim President Biden has blood on his hands. ISIS Khorasan claimed responsibility for the twin blasts. Here is a special report by Muslim Network about ISIS Khorasan.
ISIS in Afghanistan calls itself ISIS Khorasan. If you Google what is Khorasan, you will find everything about Khorasan wheat and Khorasan bread. That is delicious. But where is the real Khorasan? Khorasan is a historic region. It comprises the present territories of northeastern Iran, parts of Afghanistan, and southern parts of Central Asia. In ISIS' transnational ideology and anti-Shia agenda, it calls itself Khorasan. The U.S. media refers to them as ISIS-K or ISK. They've been suspected of nearly 100 attacks against civilians in Afghanistan and Pakistan. They are also considered responsible for roughly 250 clashes with the U.S., Afghan, and Pakistani forces since January 2017. ISIS-K and the Taliban have been fighting with one another for a while. Here is a map of ISIS-K clashes with the Taliban in 2017 and 2018. ISIS-K believes the Taliban have become too moderate. They may be right. The New York Times reported that American military and Taliban commanders not only collaborate for the safe evacuation, but also to deter ISIS-K.
The New York Times is reporting that the recent evacuations have been possible because of Taliban cooperation. Taliban has allowed most people to reach the airport unscathed. They have also worked against the threat of ISIS Khorasan attacks, U.S. military commanders say. So far, more than 104,000 people have been flown out, with thousands currently waiting at Kabul Airport. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says there are still 500 Americans trying to get out of Afghanistan. Another 1,000 Americans do not want to leave unless their families are allowed to leave with them. In related news, Turkey's troops are withdrawing from Afghanistan, where they have run Kabul's international airport for the last 6 years. Turkey, abandoning a plan to remain after the U.S. withdrawal, thanked Pakistan and Tajikistan for their cooperation in the evacuation of troops. However, according to Afghan TV Tulu, Now the Taliban are requesting Turkey to keep running the airport. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki blasted Blackwater co-founder Eric Prince on Wednesday. Prince, a defense contractor, is charging $6,500 per person to leave Afghanistan safely, according to the Wall Street Journal. Psaki said, "I don't think any human being who has a heart and soul would support efforts to profit off of people's agony and pain." In his 2013 memoir, Prince said that he provided the CIA with links to Afghan warlords who helped topple the Taliban and drive al-Qaeda into hiding. The Taliban has appointed a former Guantanamo Bay detainee as Afghanistan's acting defense minister. Al Jazeera reports that Mullah Abdul Qayyum Zakir was arrested by U.S. forces after their invasion of the country in 2001. After his release, Zakir directed military operations in the north of Afghanistan before assuming the position of the Taliban's general military commander. In 2016, he called on the Taliban leadership to negotiate with the U.S. and Western governments. A Taliban spokesman said it will unveil a new governance framework for Afghanistan in the next few weeks. Guantanamo Bay, located at the eastern tip of Cuba, was established in 2002 under former U.S. President George Bush. A May 2020 Amnesty International report found that of the 779 men who were taken to Guantanamo, only 7 had been convicted of any crime. Currently, Guantanamo Bay has 39 detainees. Most of them have never been charged or found guilty of any crimes. Armenia's parliament descended into a mass brawl on Wednesday. The punching session reflected a divided country in the aftermath of last year's defeat at the hands of Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan conquered its internationally recognized area of Nagorno-Karabakh from Armenian occupation. Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan had faced a backlash over a peace deal with Azerbaijan. This saw Armenia cede swaths of territory it had controlled for decades. During a parliamentary session on Wednesday, fighting began with water bottles and sanitizers. This later descended into mass fighting on the chamber's floor. The United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF, is asking the U.S. State Department to call the 2017 mass murder of Rohingya Muslims a genocide. It wants the department to publicly conclude if the Burmese military's actions against the Rohingya meet the legal definition of crimes against humanity or genocide. The Commission says doing so would assist worldwide efforts at the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice to hold Burmese authorities accountable for their crimes. The United Nations has documented instances of Burmese military units indiscriminately killing civilians, committing mass rape, as well as arbitrarily detaining the Rohingya. USCIRF marked the 4th anniversary of the tragedy yesterday. On August 25, 2017, the Burmese military launched a genocidal campaign in Rakhine State against the largely Muslim Rohingya community. Indian media is reporting that in the past 4 days, 16 Muslims have been arrested in Assam state for alleged pro-Taliban posts on social media. The arrested individuals include a medical student, a police officer, a teacher, and a journalist. Indian Muslims in Assam say they fear backlash and collective punishment in the wake of the arrests. Muslims in India are subject to much discrimination. In Assam in particular, India's systemic bias has resulted in the Washington, D.C.-based Genocide Watch issuing one of 2 genocide alerts for India. The second genocide alert for Indian government abuses is in Kashmir. Hundreds of environmentalists descended on central London yesterday. This was for the 3rd day of mass protests planned across the British capital. Protesters marched to the Piccadilly Circus after first gathering in front of the Brazilian embassy to rally for indigenous peoples of the Amazon rainforests. Demonstrators closed the city's main junction and disrupted traffic. Police arrested 102 protesters. They are part of the Extinction Rebellion movement. This is a worldwide environmental movement that aims to use non-violent civil disobedience to force government action to fight climate change, biodiversity loss, and the risk of social and ecological collapse. The protests come only 2 months before the UN Climate Summit COP26 that is to be hosted by the UK from October 31st to November 12th. World leaders are expected to meet in Glasgow to accelerate action towards the goals of the Paris Agreement and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Pakistan has strongly condemned the demolition of the ancient Bilal Mosque by Indian authorities. The Pakistan Foreign Office statement came after Indian authorities tore down the house of worship in Faridabad, India. Pakistan's statement condemned the Indian government's perpetual targeting of Muslims and their places of worship by the Hindutva-driven BJP government. It called this an indelible blot on the so-called largest democracy. Pakistan urged the international community, the United Nations, the Organization of Islamic Conference, and relevant human rights organizations to hold India accountable for systemic and blatant human rights violations against minorities. The pandemic of the unvaccinated continues to worsen. More people are in American hospitals for COVID-19 this August than they were at the same time last year. 100,000 people are currently hospitalized with COVID-19 in the U.S. This is a level not seen since January 30th, when vaccines for the virus were not widely available. New deaths in America have already risen to an average of more than 1,000 a day. More people in Florida are catching the virus, being hospitalized and dying from it now than at any point in the pandemic. In related news, Delta Airlines became the first major American company to levy a penalty to encourage workers to get vaccinated against COVID-19. The company will impose a $200 monthly surcharge on health insurance premiums for unvaccinated employees. Meanwhile, over 1,000 people gathered in New York City to protest school vaccination mandates on Wednesday. The group gathered in front of City Hall to object to the announcement earlier this week that all school staff must be vaccinated with no option given for COVID testing. Protesters included New York City employees, Metropolitan Transportation Authority train operators, and parents. The U.S. House of Representatives has passed an update to the 1965 Voting Rights Act. It restores a critical provision of the landmark civil rights law that requires places with a history of voting discrimination to be under federal supervision. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act passed on Tuesday, 219 to 212, on party lines. The bill now faces an uncertain future in the U.S. Senate. The House passed a similar version of the legislation in 2019, gaining just one Republican vote, but it never passed the Senate, which was then under GOP control. The U.S. Supreme Court on Tuesday allowed the revival of an immigration policy that forced asylum seekers to wait in Mexico for their court dates. This deals a blow to President Joe Biden's efforts to overhaul immigration laws put in place by former President Donald Trump. Under Trump's Remain in Mexico program, tens of thousands of non-Mexican asylum seekers, mostly from Central America, were sent to Mexico. They were to stay there pending the outcome of their applications. The Biden administration moved quickly to start dismantling and end the controversial policy, officially called the Migrant Protection Protocols. That move made its way through the U.S. court system, prompting the administration to eventually ask the Supreme Court for a stay in reinstating the program. In a brief unsigned order, however, the court said Tuesday that the application for a stay is denied. Yael Shaker, senior U.S. advocate at Refugees International, called the ruling nothing short of cruel. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
In one of our previous analysis segments, we discussed the education of Rohingya refugees. We shared the findings of the report, Let Rohingya Learn, by the Burma Task Force. Head of the task force joins Saleha Farouk for a detailed conversation. Let's watch again.
Thank you very much. Today, we're very happy to be joined by Adam Carroll, who is Director of United Nations Program at the Special Burma Task Force campaign. Thank you so much, Adam, for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Now, you recently authored a report entitled Let the Rohingya Learn. This publication was put out on the heels of a statement by Cox's Bazar CSO NGO, which reported that a lack of formal education for children and youth was being faced by the Rohingya communities today, and for a long time, of course. Tell us about these gaps in education for these refugee children and youth.
Yeah, thank you for your attention. This is really a very serious crisis, the lack of access to education. Rohingya community members have been bringing this up as a priority and asking us to get more involved. So we have done some research, issued this report, and indeed, not only have Rohingya been systematically denied access to education in their homeland, in Rakhine State, Burma, but now as refugees in Bangladesh, about 600,000 children have really very limited educational opportunities. The government there has limited them because their idea is that the migrants need to go home, even though that's not likely anytime soon. And so they were worried about providing more services. Services have been largely, limited to food and shelter. And the education that has been allowed in the Cox's Bazar camps have been the early grades, and they have not even been allowed to call them schools. They're called learning centers. And the international NGOs have very limited kind of socialization, basic skills for the youngest children. And there is no certification, there is no high school or pathway to higher education. Those doors are locked. And this is why we think a special pressure on the Bangladesh government is needed to change those policies.
Thank you. Now, experts are saying that these barriers to schooling for Rohingya refugees is not necessarily due to limited resources, but from Bangladeshi policies, as you mentioned, that deliberately deprive Rohingya children from education for the purpose of preventing their reintegration into society. This is a very interesting fact that was released recently. If you could tell us about the long-term implications of such a practice from the Bangladeshi government.
Yes, really, it's an extension of genocidal policy. When we see in Burma that the government there refused access to Rohingya children for 2 generations, what does that do to a people? And then once these traumatized people have fled into Bangladesh, which has taken them on, then to deny their children a future by restricting education, it's really a shocking thing. We should say, however, that a number of host countries do something similar. They deny refugees, and specifically the Rohingya, refugee status legally. They just say, oh, these people aren't refugees, they're migrants. And doing so, they then restrict education. Certainly many countries, and we deal with this in the report a bit, Malaysia, for example, which has many Rohingya refugees there. It does limit access in public schools. India limits access in public schools. The policy is to keep Rohingya isolated from the general population. And we certainly see that in Bangladesh again, this policy of isolation and restriction. They are afraid the Rohingya will stay, and they're not seeing the Rohingya as a potential resource. Just as in the United States, there are some groups that don't see immigrants as resources, and they don't want to invest in them. They see them only as threats. This is a wrong way to think. However, we, Burma Task Force, with our allies, support eventual repatriation. And I understand that the Rohingya would prefer to go back to their homeland, but it is not safe, and they don't have rights. And with the current coup and the current unrest and the conflict in Rakhine State, we're not going to see repatriation anytime soon. So let's invest in education.
Focusing in on one of the major findings from the report that you recently published, if you could tell us about how the rights restrictions and exclusions that resulted from Burma's 1982 citizenship laws might have led to Rohingya children being illiterate to begin with, and how that legacy has continued on well after their fleeing of Burma.
Right. Well, Burmese government statistics show that Rakhine State has an overall fairly high literacy rate, 84.7%, I think, and yet the literacy rate among Rohingya children there before the mass displacement was really low. I mean, 80% were not literate. And so the lack of access to schools was partly because after 2012, the policy shifted to prevent freedom of movement to Rohingya in the Rakhine State area. And without freedom of movement, they couldn't go from village to village to their little schools. And Rohingya were also sometimes just banned from the schools, but other times Rakhine Buddhist teachers just didn't want to teach them. There was a whole range of exclusions that impacted access, and that went all the way up to Sitwe University, which originally had Rohingya students, but then they banned Rohingya students. So it's systematic, and in the name of national security, of course, it was done that way, and prolonged. So this kind of terrible targeting of children just went along with the general genocidal policies to disenfranchise Rohingya people. And of course, that led to the mass atrocities. So the Rohingya who remain in Rakhine State, relatively little is known of their conditions because they are kind of locked up in an open air prison. Very few international observers have been allowed in, and they don't say a lot because they're afraid of losing that very slight access. So we have to assume that they don't have access to education now, except, and I should put one exception here that is important, the Rohingya themselves have been very resilient. And the report finds that volunteer teachers have been trying to teach their own community during this whole period of oppression in Rakhine State, in Burma. Quietly, secretly even. Some of them are madrasas, some of them are regular schools, but they've been trying to teach the Rohingya children. And now, as those teachers were displaced into Bangladesh, for example, they are continuing this very quiet education, but it is limited. It is very limited. And unfortunately, with the Bangladesh government not permitting international NGOs to support these grassroots efforts, there is a disconnect. To really support these community-run educational efforts in the refugee camps of Bangladesh, there needs to be certification. There needs to be an overall system. And there are some kind of foundation for that in the madrasa system, but it needs a lot more support, and it needs acceptance by the government instead of banning internet access or banning phone service. Much of the pandemic last year, there was no internet service in the Bangladesh camps. And so that meant that there could be no distance learning. It really one layer upon another of exclusion.
Thank you for that insight. Now, your report spotlighted a few major global actors that had stood in the way of this education, as you mentioned, this idea of support. When it comes to Rohingya education and supporting it, why do nations place such significant obstacles in the pathway to Rohingya education, especially in regards to a few major countries that prohibit Rohingya from accessing public schooling as well as this community-based education that you mentioned?
Right. Well, this is just a divisive ideology, a particular kind of politics. You know, we saw during the pandemic how in Malaysia, xenophobic discourse suddenly targeted the Rohingya. Rohingya refugees in Malaysia had, until the pandemic, had relatively good lives and access, relatively speaking. It wasn't perfect by any means, but then suddenly another layer of online social media campaigns vilifying Rohingya as threats, even as agents of infection, bringing the virus to the general population, and so forth and so on. So that made it even harder for the government to look at Rohingya as part of the whole, and instead they looked at them as strangers who don't even deserve hospitality, but deserve somehow control. So this is a kind of way of thinking. It's fear-based. It's very unfortunate. And in Malaysia, we see a largely Muslim nation treating a Muslim refugee population so badly. We also see in Saudi Arabia some similar restrictions. It's a global problem, and it needs to change. I did want to acknowledge that Anika Rahman, who has worked with us, engaged with did some interviews directly with CSOs in Bangladesh. And also Imam Malik had done some research on the madrasa system, especially in Rakhine State, but somewhat in Bangladesh. So these helped inform our report, as well as a wide survey.
Definitely. Now, in the remaining 60 seconds or so that we have left, if we can perhaps conclude with some recommendations or suggestions that might have emanated from your report, what's needed here from global governance when it comes to the rights of Rohingya refugee children and their education?
Well, one call that's also been made by Human Rights Watch is that governments could make their donations conditional on some of the money going to education, because you can't just treat Rohingya like animals in a zoo and just feed them. You have to help them help themselves. Partner with Rohingya leaders, ask them what they need, build trust, support financially. And the international community has been generous, but the money is not going to education. Allow that to happen. And stop with the negative xenophobic discourse. It doesn't help anyone. And there are other ways to keep power if you're in government. You don't need to do it that way. We have other recommendations specifically, of course, allowing certification, a pathway to higher education. Give them hope. Allow them to have hope. Stop, oppressing an already traumatized community. Rohingya have a lot to offer. They don't want to be a problem. They want to be part of the future.
Let Rohingya Learn, a major report published by Adam Carroll, who is Director of United Nations Programs at Justice for All's Burma Task Force. Adam, thank you for your important time today.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sadha. Before moving on to our next analysis, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. In our show last night, we covered the news of Afghan refugees temporarily sheltering at Northern Virginia Community College's Annandale campus and at the Dulles Expo Center. Muslim community in Virginia is prepared and ready to help. To discuss this in detail, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Afghan refugees continue to come out. Taliban and American military commanders are making sure that evacuations go normal. More than 80,000 people have left Afghanistan. But here comes ISIS Khorasan. They were suspecting an attack 24 hours ago, and for the last 12 hours, America and Taliban have been telling people to move away from the airport. And they have been successful in doing 2 suicide bombings. We have one Afghan American with us in our Chicago studio to discuss it. He is coming live to us from Virginia. Yaqub Zargarpur. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, Mujahid. Good to have me. Good to be here.
Yaqub Zargarpur is a business person and is a chairperson of Darun Noor Muslim Association of Virginia. He himself is an Afghan from Mazar-e-Sharif. Tell us, do you know what is the current situation on the Afghan Kabul Airport?
I really do not, unfortunately, do not know because I have been extremely busy here with the arrival of the evacuees and the arrival of refugees, and we're getting ready for that. So I'm intimately involved with that, and been involved with a lot of meetings and going to places, trying to get supplies.
How many Afghans have so far arrived in the Virginia area?
The Virginia area, right now, they haven't, we don't have the numbers. There have been very few. However, the total evacuees as of this morning have been 101,000 evacuees, Afghans that have Afghans and American citizens have arrived. According to my understanding, about 6,000 are American citizens, so the rest of them, about 95,100, are Afghan evacuees.
So these are overall situation, people who have been lifted by the United States and other nations outside Afghanistan. But in the Virginia area, we have heard close to 8,000 people have arrived at the Dulles Airport. And they may not be American citizens, probably. Otherwise, they will just simply take a flight to go home. And you are involved in taking care of that. So what are the things your Islamic Center in Virginia is doing for these Afghan refugees who are arriving in the Virginia area?
Those who are arriving should be a lot more than 8,000 in the Dallas airport. Right now, Department of Defense, DOD, and DOS, they are in charge. They are the ones who are going to receive them at Dallas airport, and they're the ones who are going to take them to Dallas Expo Center. That's the holding area. From there, then they are decided if there are SIVs, special immigration visas, for those who have worked with our troops and other allies. And so they are going to be then transferred to other states like Texas. And there are those who have very limited papers. Then they are being transferred to Virginia. I believe it's Fort Lee. That's where they are going to be processed. Once they have done all the processing and all the checks, then they will be resettled in different states. So states, when they arrive, they are not resettled immediately in any of the states. However, when they arrived Thursday night, they were responsibility of Virginia Emergency Management Department, and they were sent to Nova campus, Annandale. So there we were able to mobilize nurses, doctors, a lot of volunteers, and all the supplies they needed until Saturday morning when the DOD made the decision to move everybody to Dallas Expo and make that the holding area instead of campuses on different colleges and universities. So right now they are the ones who are in charge and who are going to take care of them, whatever they need. However, we are available. Whatever they need, we have ample supplies. We have provided translators when they needed anything. For example, like halal food vendors, we have given them a huge list and a huge list of all the translators, volunteers, and otherwise, given it to them so they are working. And communication has been a little difficult and hard at the beginning because everything has been so fast and so chaotic. However, things are getting much, much smoother and easier. And the Office of Virginia Governor has been extremely helpful. We've been in constant contact with them. But our volunteers and everybody are ready to help in any capacity we can at this moment.
So what you're doing is you're making sure there are enough volunteers available for translation and the vendors who can provide halal food. How many volunteers do you have at this moment?
So just Darul Noor, we have signed up 401 volunteers right now. And that's just Darul Noor. So all the other Islamic organizations in Masajid total, I would guess over 1,000 volunteers just in Northern Virginia area.
That is a substantial work. How were you able to get 400 people and around the city, 1,000 people to volunteer? What is your mechanism?
Well, we have a lot of, this is what's happening in Afghanistan, right? It's not an Afghan crisis. This is a humanitarian crisis. And people of Virginia are humanitarians. They are kind, they're helpful, not only Muslims. Our volunteers are from all walks of life. Our volunteers are from our servicemen and women that have served several tours in Afghanistan. And they want their brothers, they want the people who have served them, protected them, and guide them in Afghanistan to come here. They are our volunteers. So we have reached out to them. The first time we found out that we're going to do, within a week, we had just in Darul Noor over 401, and it's growing, signed up to do anything and everything we want them to do. We're organizing them. We have team leaders who are going to take care of all the needs, especially when all of them come and resettle in Virginia. So it has been overwhelming for all of us, but also inspiring. This kind of response has been extremely fulfilling, and it has restored our faith in humanity.
This is very good to know that you are all ready, but has Department of Defense, who is taking care of the whole thing at this moment, requested any type of help, or help is ready, but there is no demand at this moment?
Help is ready. Wherever they needed more help, they have reached out to us. We would like to do more. We know we can do more, but because of health reasons, because of security reasons, and any other reasons they may have, their willingness to accept some of our offers and help has been rejected. But there is because a lot of evacuees who are coming to Afghanistan, they are not vaccinated. So they're being tested. If anyone who's tested positive for COVID, they're being separated. They're quarantined with their families for 14 days. And a lot of that is being provided by the United States government, DOD and DOS. And State Department is in total control and total in charge.
At the initial stages, there were reports of a lot of chaos on Kabul Airport. But since then, amazing job has been done. 100,000 people have been evacuated, although tens of thousands are still waiting there. Similarly, from Qatar, horrible reports are coming out of the facilities were not quite ready. Qataris have taken people who they took care of in the houses and all that, but people who America is taking care of in American base have horrible living conditions. So tell us if the reception in Dulles Airport and where these 8,000 people are temporarily staying is better than that chaotic situation in other places.
So I can't really speak about all the other countries and how they're doing. However, here in Virginia, I have met with the CEO of Dulles Expo Center, and I visited the center. Yes, they are ready. The conditions may not be to our standards per se, but much, much better than everyone's. Yes, they have all the facilities. Yes, they have everything needed, and it's a much, much larger place. So they're a lot more prepared, and it's a lot more comfortable. We would want it to be much, much better. We want, especially, our wishes are that their welcoming would be a 5-star welcoming, but these are not normal times. This is a chaotic situation, and they are doing the best they can for the way the situation has been handed to them. And yes, they are doing, I believe they are doing a good job. Things are much, much better. A lot more supplies are available, and contractors who have been contracted by the Department of Defense and State Department are doing everything they can, and we're in communications with them at all times. So the situation here is much, much better. Of course, there's going to be little situations here and there, but that's when we step in and we will take care of them, especially those who are citizens of the United States and also the green card holders and permanent residents. But all in all, I would say they're doing a wonderful job, and things are much, much better considering.
How many Afghans are there, Afghan Americans in Virginia or Washington, D.C. greater area?
Very hard to say. I would probably say around 40,000. That was my last information I got. It was about 40,000.
Thank you for your time. Is your family in Afghanistan safe and healthy?
They are in Afghanistan, and we're praying for their safety. They're doing everything they can to stay safe. And we ask all of our brothers and sisters to please pray for them. May Allah keep them safe. May Allah keep all Afghans in Afghanistan safe. We want nothing but prosperity for our Muslim brothers and sisters all over Asia, all over the world, and particularly right now in Afghanistan. And thank you very much for this opportunity. It was wonderful talking to you, Brother Imam Mujahid.
Thank you so much, Yaqub Zargarpur Sahab, who is the chairperson of Darun Noor Muslim Association of Virginia. Samana, they have done an amazing job. Although Department of Defense and State are directly controlling the whole thing, but they sent out a message, and more than 400 people from their own mosque volunteered, and neighbors of other faith. And throughout Virginia area, 1,000 volunteers are ready to help those people who have left Afghanistan in a very difficult situation. Back to you.
Thank you, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.